Alright, so listen to this, because what Rome did to defeated queens wasn't just brutal, it was cold, calculated, and meant to send a message that still makes your stomach turn. When Roman legions crushed an enemy, killing the ruler was often the easy part. The real power move? Keeping them alive and breaking them in public. Especially if that ruler was a woman who once wore a crown. Take Queen Zenobia. One minute she's commanding an empire stretching from Egypt to Anatolia, going toe-to-toe with Rome itself. The next, she's dragged through the streets of Rome in chains, golden chains so heavy guards had to help carry the weight, while thousands cheered her humiliation. And she was one of the lucky ones. Roman law didn't care if you were royalty. Once you lost, you weren't a queen anymore, you were property. No rights. No protection. No mercy guaranteed. And for captured queens, defeat often meant something far worse than execution, public degradation, abuse, and being turned into a living warning for anyone else who thought about resisting Rome. And here's the part that really hits hard, this wasn't random cruelty. It was policy. A system designed to erase dignity itself. So that hook sets the tone, because to understand what happened to queens like Zenobia, you've got to understand how Rome legally stripped them of humanity the moment they lost. This wasn't soldiers going rogue. This was the system working exactly as intended. Under Roman law, once an army was defeated, every single person on the losing side instantly lost their legal identity. Didn't matter if you were a farmer, a general, or a queen who used to command thousands. The moment Rome won, you stopped being a person and became property. That idea came straight from Jus Gentium, the so-called law of nations, which basically said conquest erased freedom. Just like that. Roman citizens had protections. You couldn't just whip them in public. You couldn't execute them without a trial without people losing their minds. But foreign captives? Totally different story. No rights. No appeals. No safety net. A captured queen had the same legal standing as the lowest-ranking soldier, or worse. And gender didn't save anyone. Nobility didn't save anyone. Rome's earliest laws, going all the way back to the 12 Tables, made it crystal clear, prisoners of war belonged to the state or to the soldiers who captured them. For women who once sat on thrones, that meant their crowns became meaningless the second chains replaced them. Ancient writers like Tacitus didn't sugarcoat this. He straight up admits Roman officials felt zero hesitation humiliating women who had once ruled entire peoples. Power vanished instantly, and what came next was designed to remind everyone watching just how absolute Roman dominance really was. And that's where things start getting truly hard to watch, because once the law erased their status, Rome turned their suffering into public spectacle. What makes this even darker is how Rome didn't just defeat its enemies, they performed that defeat. Once a queen survived capture, her suffering wasn't hidden away. It was dragged straight into the streets and put on display for the entire empire to see. This is where the Roman triumph comes in. On paper, it was a victory parade. In reality, it was psychological warfare. When the Senate approved a triumph, the city of Rome basically turned into a massive stage. The route ran for miles, from the Field of Mars, through the Forum, all the way up to the Capitoline Hill, packed shoulder to shoulder with cheering citizens. The parade was carefully choreographed to hit hard. First came musicians and performers, setting a celebratory tone. Then paintings and models of conquered cities rolled by, showing Romans exactly who had been crushed. Exotic animals followed, proof that Rome's reach stretched to the ends of the known world. And then came the prisoners. Captured soldiers marched in chains, but right at the front were the rulers, the kings and queens. Their royal clothing was often left intact on purpose. Rome wanted the contrast to sting. Crowns, robes, jewels, all still there. But now paired with shackles. Queens who once commanded armies were forced to shuffle through jeering crowds, fully visible, fully powerless. This wasn't accidental humiliation, It was deliberate theater. Rome was saying, loud and clear, that no throne was safe and no crown was sacred. For female captives, this was especially cruel. Thousands of eyes. An entire city watching as dignity was stripped away step by step. And the worst part? No one knew what waited at the end of the route. Survival or death. Mercy or execution. That uncertainty alone was torture, and for some queens, the parade wasn't the end of the nightmare. It was just the beginning. That uncertainty became painfully real in the case of Queen Zenobia, because her entire fate hung on how Rome chose to use her. After defying the empire and building a rival power in the East, she wasn't just a prisoner, she was a symbol Rome could exploit. Zenobia had ruled an empire stretching from Egypt to Anatolia, openly challenging Roman authority. When Emperor Aurelian finally defeated her in 272 CE as she tried to flee toward Persia, he didn't just capture a queen. He captured the perfect centerpiece for his triumph. Someone whose fall would scream Roman dominance louder than any speech. 2 years later, Zenobia was marched through Rome during Aurelian's triumph. Ancient sources describe the scene in uncomfortable detail. She wasn't dressed in rags. She was drenched in luxury, jewels flashing in the sunlight, royal clothing intact. Rome wanted everyone to see exactly what kind of power they had crushed. But then there were the chains. These weren't simple restraints. Zenobia was bound in massive golden chains so heavy that guards had to walk beside her to help carry the weight. Gold, the same wealth she once controlled, had been turned into the tool of her humiliation. Every step made the message clearer: Rome now owned everything she had been. Crowds watched for hours as she moved slowly through the streets, burdened and exposed. And yet, ancient accounts say she never broke. She held herself with composure, refusing to beg or collapse. That defiance may have saved her life. Instead of execution, Zenobia was spared. But make no mistake, mercy came with strings. She lived out her remaining years near Rome, not as a ruler, but as a reminder. A living monument to what happens when you challenge the empire. And as shocking as Zenobia's ordeal was, what happened in Roman Britain shows how much worse things could get. If Zenobia's story shows Rome at its most calculated, the fate of Queen Boudicca and her daughters shows Rome at its most openly vicious. This wasn't a defeated enemy from a distant land. This was an allied queen, someone who was supposed to be under Roman protection. When King Prasutagus of the Iceni died around 60 CE, he tried to play it safe. He left half his kingdom to Emperor Nero and half to his daughters, hoping Rome would respect the deal and leave his family in peace. Instead, Roman officials tossed the will aside like it meant nothing. They seized the land, the property, everything. When Boudicca protested, Rome responded with pure domination. According to Tacitus, Boudicca was publicly flogged. That alone was a massive violation. Beating a Roman citizen required legal justification. Beating a queen of an allied kingdom was meant to humiliate, to send a warning. But the Romans didn't stop there. Her daughters, young, unmarried, likely still teenagers, were violated by Roman soldiers. Tacitus doesn't linger on the details, but the fact that he records it at all tells you how extreme it was. Even by Roman standards, this crossed a line. This wasn't random cruelty. It was public, deliberate, and symbolic. By abusing the queen and her daughters in front of their own people, Roman officials were saying, "This is what happens when you resist us." But here's the twist nobody in Rome expected. Instead of breaking Boudicca, it lit a fuse. The humiliation meant to crush resistance sparked one of the most dangerous rebellions Rome ever faced. And what happened next nearly tore Roman Britain apart. That fuse exploded fast. What Rome meant as a lesson in fear turned into a nightmare they couldn't control. Boudicca didn't retreat into silence or shame, she went to war, and she went to war furious. Tacitus says she rallied the Iceni and neighboring tribes by speaking not as a queen fighting for a throne, but as a woman demanding justice. She reminded them of the flogging, of her daughter's violation, of how Rome had stripped their land and dignity in one move. And people listened. Hard. The rebellion that followed was brutal and fast. Boudicca's forces swept through Roman Britain, wiping out 3 major Roman settlements. Camulodunum went first. Then Londinium. Then Verulamium. Entire cities burned. Tens of thousands of Roman citizens and allies were killed. For a moment, it looked like Rome might actually lose Britain. But Rome eventually regrouped. Discipline, armor, and battlefield tactics beat raw numbers. At an unknown site, Roman forces crushed the rebellion. Faced with capture, and knowing exactly what Rome did to defeated queens, Tacitus says Boudicca chose poison over chains. And then her daughters disappear from history. After their public violation, they're never mentioned again. No execution records. No exile. No marriage. Just silence. Their fate, whatever it was, mattered so little to Roman record keepers that it vanished entirely. That silence might be the most chilling detail of all. Because for Rome, the message had already been sent. Their bodies had done the work. Their suffering had served its purpose. And for captured rulers who survived long enough to be paraded through Rome, there was still one final place waiting at the end of the triumph. For many captured rulers, the triumph wasn't the end of the story, it was the calm before something far worse. As the parade wound its way up toward the Capitoline Hill, there was a silent split in the road that most spectators never noticed. While the general went on to make offerings to Jupiter, certain prisoners were led away. Their destination was the Mamertine prison. Built into the side of the Capitoline itself, this place wasn't a normal jail. It was a death chamber. The upper room held prisoners briefly, but the real terror waited below, a dark pit accessible only through a hole in the ceiling. No light. No sanitation. No escape. This was where Rome's most dangerous enemies were erased. Execution methods varied. Some captives were strangled. Others were left to starve in the dark. All of it happened out of sight while the city celebrated above. The timing was deliberate. Rome wanted joy upstairs and suffering below. Vercingetorix, the Gallic leader who once united Gaul against Julius Caesar, was kept alive for 6 years just for this moment. Paraded in Caesar's triumph, visibly broken, he was then taken straight to the Mamertine and executed. Jugurtha, king of Numidia, met an even slower death. Ancient accounts say he went mad with terror when he was lowered into the dungeon. He starved for days, screaming in the dark, while Rome partied. For queens marked for execution, this was the likely end. Chains. Parade. Darkness. Silence. But not every ruler was killed. Some, like Zenobia, were spared, though even that mercy carried its own kind of cruelty. And that brings us to what all of this really meant for Rome, and for the women who dared to rule. By the time you step back and look at all of this together, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. What Rome did to captured queens wasn't chaos or cruelty spiraling out of control. It was power, carefully engineered. Roman conquest didn't stop at winning battles. It went after identity. Law stripped defeated rulers of personhood. Triumph stripped them of dignity. And for queens, especially, the punishment was designed to cut deeper, because their humiliation carried symbolic weight. If a woman who commanded armies could be broken, what hope did anyone else have? Zenobia's golden chains, Boudicca's flogging, the silent disappearance of her daughters, the executions beneath the Capitoline, none of these were exceptions. They were tools. Messages broadcast to entire populations. Rome didn't just conquer territory. It conquered fear. And the irony is hard to miss. The stone walls of the Mamertine prison still stand today. Tourists walk past them without realizing what they represent. The triumphs recorded in ancient texts sound glorious on the page, but they were built on broken lives, stolen dignity, and deliberate degradation. Queens who once administered justice and commanded loyalty were turned into spectacles. Their suffering became entertainment. Their downfall became reassurance that Rome's power was absolute. That's the real legacy hiding behind the marble statues and victory arches. An empire that ruled as much through humiliation as through force, and made sure no one ever forgot the price of defiance.